The United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon sent his chief of staff to Sri Lanka on Thursday to mediate a solution to the deadlock between the Sri Lankan government and the LTTE rebels regarding the thousands of trapped civilians in the no-fire zone. The Sri Lankan government says a massive army offensive that began in November 2008 has left the Tamil Tigers close to defeat and cornered them in a small area of the northeast. This is at a time when human rights observers express concern over the 250,000 Tamil civilians who've been trapped in the conflict zone where no media outlets are allowed entry. According to local and international sources, the so-called defensive shelling of the Sri Lankan Army into the no-fire zone is causing civilian casualties. Tamil civilians who would otherwise have no safe haven, but to continue being stranded in the jungles, left at the mercy of fierce rebel army crossfire. Today, Four Corners asks, are the LTTE Elam rebels really being defeated by the Sri Lankan Army? If defenseless people are paying the price for that, and whether a peaceful end is conceivable to a civil war that has taken almost 70,000 lives.
Hi there, my name is Rubin Zarvan, and you're watching Four Corners here on Press TV. Tonight's show is all about Sri Lanka. And joining me to discuss that, in London we have Hugo Charlton. He's an international human rights lawyer. It's good to have you, Mr. Charlton. And again from London, we're joined by Jan Jananayan, Tamils Against Genocide. It's a pleasure having you, sir, and you, ma'am. Now, let me come to you first, John. The government of Sri Lanka claims that they're close to successfully, finally defeating and crushing the LTTE, the rebels. Now, what do you think gives them this confidence? Because, after all, in the past, the rebels have been known to lose territory, to cede territory, only to win it back later.
Well, yes. I mean, the point is that not allowing international press to go forward and verify these claims. So, I mean, I don't see how we can have any confidence in those claims. And as a matter of point, the government it's very important for the government to make this claim right now because they're in the process of hoping to get a loan from the IMF of about $1 billion. I mean, the country is broke and they have to declare victory, and that's what this is about. If their claims are correct, they would, of course, allow the international media in. But because the country is broke and they need to declare victory, what they're doing is targeting civilians, and we hear that they're using chemical bombs. I mean, what they're doing is massively illegal, and the whole incentive is to get these international loans.
Mr. Charlton, do you subscribe to this premise put forward by the other guests that this is just a false declaration of victory by the army?
Well, I'm not a military expert. The general Western consensus is that the government is doing well and that this is an opportunity for them to win the war. I think in reality the chances of winning the war in this way are virtually nil. I mean, this is a long-term problem which can only be solved eventually through dialogue over a long term, even if there is a short-term military victory which is not acknowledged. I think the more serious matter is that the civilians are being involved. That's clearly in breach of international law, and the point is, irrespective of whether or not the civilians are there voluntarily, the shelling and other attacks on the civilian population is clearly a breach of international law.
Jananayagam, tell me, now, let's imagine, suppose for a minute, that the government actually does succeed in trouncing, finally, the tigers. Now, regardless of the humanitarian, the tragic aspect there, now, would that necessarily mean the end of the Tamil separatist ideology as well?
Well, no, and the reason is that, this is not what I consider a mere humanitarian tragedy. We consider this a genocide. What we, as the Tamil people, what we consider this to be is an effort to eliminate the people as a whole. And I agree that there are a lot of violations of humanitarian law. What is missed here is that simply the intent to cleanse the territory of the northern Vanni of Tamils is ethnic cleansing. And ethnic cleansing in an annihilatory way is, of course, very, very close to and is, in fact, genocide, if you take the parallels with Srebrenica. So, no, it doesn't end unless you kill pretty much all the Tamil people in Sri Lanka. It's simply not going to end. And there is, of course, a diaspora. So it doesn't work that way.
Hugo, now, in your opinion, is the government to blame of genocidal tendencies or anything to that effect?
Well, I'm not sure that they would argue that it's genocide. They would argue that the remaining Tamil population of at least 160,000 or more in areas occupied or controlled by the government is satisfactory, and there's no genocide going on there. I think you'll find that Tamil, I know expert will say that the circumstances under which Tamil areas which are government controlled, the circumstances for the local Tamil population are very harsh. It's said that anyone who's been involved with the tigers, so if people do come out, that they're then put in camps of various sorts, and that the conditions under which the Tamil population is living in Sri Lanka, in areas controlled by the government, is very unsatisfactory.
But Sir Hugo, is it not true that the people, some estimate around 150 to 250,000, although the official record announced by the government is much less than that, have been trapped there and they have nowhere to go? They're basically stranded in the jungles. Now, is it not true that the government might have been slightly blinded by the huge international support of it, finally claiming to defeat the LTTE, that it is kind of turning a blind eye on the humanitarian aspect, because it could easily open a corridor, a safe corridor for safe conduct and passage of the people if it wanted to?
Yes, it could. There are a number of, but the argument is that a lot of people will say the people actually are staying there voluntarily. Of course, if the people are being held as hostages, as is claimed by the British and most of the Western press, then that makes the treatment of them even harsher. But you make another interesting point, which is actually, yes, it is surprising. The Tamils have very few international friends, also have very little international coverage. On the other hand, they have been fighting a resistance movement, a liberation movement for a very long time. So, and I don't see an immediate solution to it, even if there is a short-term victory.
Jen, do you agree that the people reportedly and apparently trapped there in that northeastern territory are there out of their own will and volition?
Absolutely. I think the government's claims are laughable. If the government had genuine intent and genuine goodwill towards the people, it would not have needed to expel the UN prior to the war even starting. So the government's claims are completely ridiculous. And I cannot see how anyone with common sense could take the view that the government is incentivizing people to leave. I just heard stories the other day that there were 18 people who left in this 2-day ceasefire that the international community has called for. And those 18 people were asked to strip naked outside the camps for searching and made to walk into the IDP camps stark naked. It's ridiculous. They're obviously not incentivizing anyone to go anywhere. So I think that the facade that people are being held as hostages is ridiculous, and they've made no attempt to try and guarantee people freedom of